Thanks, Jess. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another session. For those of you that have been hanging out with us all day, thank you for being part of this. And I hope you are as astonished and blown away as I've been by just the variety of stellar content and just brilliance that's been on display. It's absolutely an honor and been very humbling to see all this unbelievable conversation about storytelling. I am really excited for this one. This has been a work in progress for several months, so it's always wonderful to see a good plan come together. For those of you, if this is your first time checking us out, I'm Sean Murphy. I'm the executive director of 1455, and I'm always happy when I have a chance to chat with Justen Ahren for a variety of reasons. For one thing, he's a dear friend and brother. He's also a brilliant artist, known mostly for his poetry, but increasingly, as we'll explore today, his photography and also his musicianship. But in addition to these, in addition to his art, he's a community builder extraordinaire, and he's one of the most soulful human beings that I know. And not least, I always am happy to point out that without his vision and example, which reached fruition via the Noepe Center for Literary Arts at Martha's Vineyard that he ran for over a decade and made that one of the finest writing workshop retreats in the country, 1455 very likely would not be in existence today. So all paths lead back to this man. So let me formally introduce him. I can't wait to talk to him about his latest project. Justen Ahren is a poet, photographer, musician, and writing workshop facilitator. He's published 2 collections of poetry, A Strange Catechism in 2013 and A Machine for Remembering from 2019. His poems have been set to music by Grammy Award-winning composer Glenn Roven and Cuban composer Ileana Perez Velasquez. His photographs are held in private collections and have been exhibited in both solo and group shows. He's received 2 commissions for poetry from Wendy Tacher Dance Theater Opera and 1 from John Sims' Afro-Dixie Project. Justen, welcome.
Hey, Sean, thank you for having me. What an honor. I mean, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. I love our conversations. To do it in this setting, in this venue, as part of 1455's Festival of Storytelling is an added honor and an added bonus. So thanks for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure for sure. So, I want to recognize and celebrate the backstory here, which is I was so moved and inspired by the project we're about to discuss. The best way to really introduce it is saying it's right over my shoulder. The orange, beautiful print you see behind you, folks, is one of Justen's works. And he was kind enough and generous enough, which is typical of him, to let us use some of his images for our festival. So if you have been paying attention to the event site and some of our promo and thought, God, these guys have it on point. We do have it on point, but here's the guy to thank for that. It's all a tribute to the amazing work he did. So that should clear up the street cred in terms of why I believe in this project and how deeply I believe in it. But let's get right to it. I had the pleasure of watching this project from fruition to where we are now. The Earth Tends to Beauty is the name of this project you've been working on, Justen. And I had a strong feeling about it, but it was very clear that a lot of other people did too. I think when we talked, you were also delighted and surprised at the outpouring of feedback you got. And I don't take any credit. I just know it was my gut feeling like he's onto something more than just a neat new idea. This was really resonating with people. So rather than me try to explain it, I'm happy to praise it. Why don't you walk us through how this all started?
Okay, yeah, thank you. It's interesting. It's an interesting story to me because, like most things that I feel like I've stumbled into or upon this. I never set out with an intention really to create something. I just start to feel things, I think, is how I work. I think I feel them before I obviously feel them before I know what form they're going to take. So during this past January, this really kind of started about 6 months ago or 7 months ago. we were all in lockdown. I live on Martha's Vineyard. It's middle of winter, and on top of that, we're all living through this pandemic. And one of the things I had, I was able to do was to go for walks with my dogs every day. And I do live in the middle of the woods. And so I would walk my dogs twice a day. And I started to notice within like this circumference, maybe of a mile route, circuitous route, we would take these logs or sections of tree trunks, and I started to photograph those. Um, and at close range. So I would be right up, inches away from it to make this photograph. And all these images were black and white. The only reason this relates to the current project is because it was almost like I had to fall through that looking glass in a way to the other side. They're in complete contrast with those black and white tree trunks, which interestingly enough, making a photograph from only inches away, it was as if I was looking at the universe. Like I was seeing, galaxies and star clusters and nebula and these distances. So the reason I say it's like falling through the looking glass with this project is because it really owes its birth to those tree trunks, those stumps that I was photographing. Because just a few weeks later, I was just feeling that kind of, restlessness. I wanted to go, I wanted to travel, but because of the way things were, I wasn't feeling like I could. Um, and for whatever reason, one afternoon, I remembered that I had wanted to go to West Texas. For whatever I had driven through there 3 years prior with my daughter, and remember seeing and feeling something that in that landscape that I wanted to photograph. And so one day I was just like, I'm going to go on Google Earth. I'm going to kind of fly over West Texas, see if I can, what I can see. And when this pandemic is over, maybe I'll go revisit some of these places. So what I found there just it blew me away. It was these geometric patterns in the earth left by tractors and farmers and irrigation roads and big circular irrigation, where the irrigation would spray the crops. And I just found this amazing landscape. But so I started to capture that using this technology, using Google Earth, the satellite technology, and then to develop them in Lightroom. The interesting thing that I found in this is directly opposite to photographing from an inch away or a few inches away and seeing galaxies in the tree trunks. I'm capturing images from thousands of miles above the earth and finding that they look like the ends of rugs or dresses or the insides of pottery designs. Or so it's like the further away I got, the more specific the object was. The closer I got, the more universal it was becoming. So that's kind of how the project came along. I didn't know what I was going to find. I didn't know what I was doing. I'm very technologically inept. And, and so I just kind of was teaching myself how to use this technology, the satellite imagery, to kind of then to somehow capture something. And I think the response, you had mentioned the response that these images generated as I was putting them up on social media and on my Instagram post and Facebook posts, because I think people didn't know what they were looking at first. They're of a landscape, but you don't know it. You wouldn't know what you were. And so people would be commenting like, oh, it looks like the edge of a dress, or it looks like, I don't even know, the comments.
Vinyl, a lot of them look like the grooves of vinyl, which was super cool.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's part of what engaged people, is that they didn't know what they were looking at, and they wanted to know what is this? How are you making this? And that kind of started it. And but I don't know that I knew I was onto anything necessarily. I just thought, wow, this is really, I find them beautiful and intriguing, and I had no idea that this was going to be here.
I don't want to overstate. When I say you're onto something, I think on a lot of levels, but just from a purely aesthetic impression, I remember looking at some of those early prints and thinking, I need frameable copies. That's how arresting they were. But then you told me or I shared with you that I had a couple of mutual friends that told me privately, can we buy those? So that's when I really sensed like this is resonating on a much deeper level than that's really cool. And then you move on to the next thing. They were really haunting in the best ways, and they stayed with me. And then I love kind of the micro story of how you were sharing that in real time. So it became a series that you were updating almost, I think about Dickens, right? And the serialization of his novels. You were sharing this work in real time as it was happening, and people came along for the ride. So I think there's a story within the story, in the sense of it's a real interesting commentary on how we storytell today. What you did this spring couldn't have happened 5 years ago. Certainly couldn't have happened 20 years ago.
That's true. And the possibilities for, I think we're just beginning to tap into what can be done. You mentioned Dickens and serialization, like what could, and not like, and I think maybe Dick, I don't know if you may know this better than I, but did Dickens write the whole thing and then just publish them in increments, or did he kind of write from piece to piece?
That's a great question. My instinct is to say he did not write it all in advance, because I feel like I've read him and others. When you read about those famous stories, the guys that were living paycheck to paycheck, that was part of the impetus. Like, I got to get paid, so I've got to write that next chapter. But we'll have to do some research. But I think the point is, at least I think generally speaking, the old school serialization was very much an act of commerce, and it was also a driver to keep people productive. But in your case, there's something even more authentic and genuine about sharing this expression, and having the mechanism of social media, which enables us to connect, but also there was the very organic leapfrog effect of people passing the word, and word of mouth spread really quickly, and you got a very passionate following.
Well, I was going to say that engagement, I think the potential for doing something in serial form through social media, you have the audience, and I was just talking with Laura Sims in the last session about this kind of sacred space that's created between storyteller and audience, the space of listening, but also the space of well, it's just the space between a teller and a listener when a story is told. And so you have this space that is facilitated by social media, where you can put an image out with some text or an explanation and engage with an audience and get real-time feedback even as people come to it. But then they're invested in that creation going forward too, because they're watching it unfold, as you alluded to. And I think that's a really magic space that we haven't quite, it hasn't really been fully explored, but really exciting to be able to watch something unfold as it's being made. And also if the maker, the storyteller, the person who's presenting these things is also open to being, I think, in that vulnerable space of their own creation too, and not always knowing where they're going, and being open to kind of revealing too the trials, the errors, the experiment of it all. So not like this beautifully packaged complete thing, but like, this is where I think I'm heading. You can almost see it in real time. This is where it's heading, or maybe it isn't. And I have people responding like, oh, I didn't think it was going to go there. I didn't know, oh, maybe you could have done this, which was a really interesting thing too, to get the feedback. Like, well, maybe you could have done that, and have to consider that in real time. And then, maybe the next post, the next image, takes that to heart, or doesn't, or continues on its own trajectory. So,
yeah. Well, so, it's really fascinating, Justin, because certainly this weekend, as we really attack storytelling from a variety of angles, which has been, so fruitful and full of insights. Nevertheless, I've had the opportunity to talk to, political writers, poets, novelists, journalists, and we circle back to a lot of common themes, none of which will be unfamiliar to you. But the one I want to kind of hone in on with you is the notion of, because I don't think that this is a compulsory rule for any creative type, but those that tend to engage with an audience over a sustained period of time and find meaning in their own work over that sustained period of time are willing to remain curious, adapt with the times, which again, I want to be very clear is not chasing trends, but rather not reacting to the world around them so much as embracing and absorbing current events, current technology, current dialogue, and reflecting it. I think it makes sense that those are the stories that tend to resonate with a wider audience or a passionate audience. But I'm doubly fascinated because knowing you as I do, I look at you, of course, this project is something only you could have done. But I also know you as a very analog guy in the best sense of the word. You're literally a man that loves the earth and the soil and works with the soil and is very content. You are not that guy that's plugged into a device 24/7. So I find a beautiful symmetry. I will not use the word growth because I think that implies that you needed to grow, but organic growth in your own kind of sensibility, kind of embracing this, but even embracing this technology, what could be more old school than really assessing images of the earth? So this is a very Justen Ahren vibe.
Well, thank you. I only embraced the technology out of necessity. I was forced because otherwise I think I would have been in West Texas with a drone or in a airplane or something. Um, but, there are lots of people who are using satellite technology to make images. I don't know what, I obviously the thing with photography, like anything, there are choices involved, and the first choice we make is framing, where we're going to point the camera, and in this sense, the satellite camera,
Yeah.
where we're going to point it, and then how we're going to frame it. And that means cropping, and, what's emitted is often just as important than the things that we omit are as important as what we include.
Sure.
Those are choices. So I don't know. Again, I've seen other people making, I follow people who are making aerial images, satellite images, because I want to know how that is, how my own work is, where it's finding its space. But I think what drew me to this is, and you were talking about my work in the soil. I'm a landscaper, but before I was a landscaper, kind of, which sounds just like, I don't know, mowing lawns and things, which I do. But before that, I worked on a farm and I drove a tractor. And my grandmother was a dairy farmer and she had 80 acres of cornfields. And I remember riding on the tractor with my father and my grandmother. And so I think these images, and I think, Sean, if I could share, I'm going to try to share
Please.
one of these so people can also get an idea what we're talking about.
Yes.
You can see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. So this is a field. And these patterns, this kind of looping, almost like stitching, embroidery, is made by a tractor. Now, down on the ground, having driven a tractor, you cannot, this area of this image is, many, it may be 3-4 acres, maybe more. I'm not sure the scale of this one. But the thing that really appeals to me, and the reason I call this series, part of the reason I call this series The Earth Tends to Beauty, is that we're down at our level of viewing and we're riding on this tractor, and this was made probably by a harrow, which is done after you plow a field. You bring these metal plates, these discs, you drag many of these discs all next to each other in a rows. You drag these over the field and it breaks up the clods and softens the ground so you can prepare it for planting. So this farmer was driving this field. I doubt they had any, in fact, I know they had no idea they were making this pattern. And so in my investigation, I thought what was interesting not only is just this beauty that is being made unbeknownst to the person who's making it, but that the earth itself is kind of this, not just a canvas, but it's as if the earth itself is transforming the work into something beyond us that we can't even appreciate because we don't have the perspective.
Right.
The technology, only by the technology do we gain this perspective. And it just made me start to think, and I'm going to go there because this is where I always go, but it made me think of the great the greater invisible world that is always functioning all around us and beyond us that we don't have access to, but we
Right.
do have access to.
Right.
But a lot of times we don't, because our nose is down at the ground level.
That's right.
You know, we're functioning on that level of like making things happen.
Yeah.
And yet we're participating at the same time in this great story that's happening on a planetary and a galactic level and a spiritual level. And it's much greater than we know. And I just thought when this beauty appeared, like, of course, it's like, it's a metaphor for this beauty that is always happening, whether we're aware of it or not. So I'm going to unshare that now. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Justin, you're really kind of tapping into, again, a theme that's come up is this notion of, certainly for storytellers, but I think also those that celebrate story and the creation and are humbled by it, is this capacity for awe and capacity to be humbled, whether that's by art or by nature, certainly. And I think that's what's one of the things, again, aside from just the beauty of the images and the enigma, right? Just looking at that there, I was like, that could be a stylized turntable turned sideways inside a frame, and you could make a case that that's exactly what that is. To think that, you know, it's a landscape. I just think certain types of people are very receptive to being ceaselessly astonished at the bounty of our earth.
Yeah.
And like you just perfectly put it, with what's right under our noses, but we literally and figuratively need to take a different perspective at times to appreciate what we don't see.
Yeah. Well, I think it was Mary Oliver who wrote something along the lines of pay attention, be astonished, write about it.
Yeah.
When asked.
Well, so let's take it a step further, because if I'm not mistaken, Justin, you know, again, you were providing some commentary and letting the images kind of speak for themselves, and the comment threads, right, became their own kind of mini story, which was neat. But after a while, I think inevitably and wonderfully, you started writing about, you know, you started getting creative with the images, and again, we were seeing in real time this hybrid. It was compelling you to. It was piquing your own creativity.
Yeah. For sure. Because as I was doing this, as I started posting these, again, because of the way I work, I didn't have a sense of what I was doing with them, or even what they were asking me to investigate, and what questions they were, you know, the images were kind of leading me to. And so this, this did happen in real time. I was beginning to understand a little bit, even though I still don't understand really why the images, what they do and why they evoke certain things in me, or I mean, I know what they relate to. There's something very mythic in the images, as an, and even like the geometry and the tensions of the geometry kind of, like there's something happening in the images with tensions, but there's also something that is evocative of, like the story of Ariadne and giving like the thread to who is it, Theseus, who goes into the center of the labyrinth. Um, and something about weaving, and anyway, so there was a lot of investigation, a lot of things that were coming to me as I was seeing these images, and I was posting, and people would respond, and it would lead me to think about, you know, dig deeper into weaving. And one of the things I did dig into weaving, and found out that something I hadn't thought of, and I kind of felt stupid for never thinking of it, but think of the invention of weaving. And I mean, I don't know that we couldn't overstate the importance. I mean, first of all, we would all be dead, so because we wouldn't have clothing. So after clothing, weaving led to pottery. And so then we had the vessels to carry our water, store our food, which then transforms society. So this idea, I think these images to me, then when I went back after kind of getting this knowledge, is like they're evoking like the very fundamental things as well as cultivation, right? Cultivating food and preparing this, working the soil. Um, these very elemental things in our that are required for us to even exist on this planet. Um,
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about, right, we kind of get a lot of mileage talking about, social media and the internet, but never mind 20 years ago, 200, 2000 years ago, how and the origin stories that you're invoking. This is when people were very close to the earth. There wasn't electricity, there wasn't anything, and so these inventions really came out of a real intimacy with the soil and the earth and the natural world. So again, I think I think what these images are stirring in people, and certainly are stirring in me, is this real, like I said, curiosity and making these connections, but also this real humility, again, in terms of and I think it's a necessary humility in 2021. Like we were just talking right before we came on about, this is pretty cool. We'd love to be in person. We'll get back to that. But boy, it's pretty neat that you're 600 miles away from me. We're screen sharing images and we're able to do a free festival and connect with people around the world. That's awesome. But I think there's a different type of humility when we look at an image like that and see something as simple, or I should say ostensibly simple, as a field in West Texas that has all the mysteries of the universe and our own kind of human story locked in there.
yeah. Well, thank you for pointing that out. Um, I have to admit too about West Texas, my idea to go there, I think this is kind of part of what startled me. And also one of the things that is, um, as an artist, we have to be flexible. At least I feel like I have to be flexible, because my whole reason for wanting to revisit that was to really document um, the the destruction to the landscape that
Yeah.
had happened, not just through farming, but that's the Permian Basin where I was. This is like this is around Lubbock, Texas, and south of Lubbock, Texas.
Mhm.
So the Permian Basin is one of the largest oil reserves, has one of the largest oil reserves underground in the world. Um, and the drilling there has been, it's off the hook. I mean, you drive through some areas and there's just, there are the oil drills and the, gas flares everywhere. It's very post-apocalyptic landscape. The air smells like sulfur. I mean, um, new roads are being cut in, to facilitate the large trucks and equipment that had to come in, because it's really a boom area.
Mhm.
Um, and this was a few years ago. And so really my idea as a photographer was to document how destroyed the landscape was, and
Right.
to see this beautiful thing. And I guess the earth tends to beauty despite is the full title of the series. And so to me, there was something that was really, really affirming about the power and the energy of the earth itself. That, even though we are dragging this metal through it, even though we are digging into it and polluting it and changing the environment, it it's still this gorgeous, it still can make beauty.
Right.
Um, and so I guess that was promising. I guess in the long term, I thought, gosh, if we could just leave it alone, or if we could actually become true stewards of the land, as opposed to always trying to take something from it,
Right.
how quickly it would return. Um, but despite even this, the the work that we do on it and the scraping and the digging, there's something beautiful that is happening. I don't know. I guess that's what makes me, kind of gives me hope.
No, and we
Uh,
have to find, yeah, I think, and that's the job of the artist, right? I mean, a lot of attention gets paid to the artists that bear witness and bravely tell difficult truths, and that's always necessary. That's always welcome.
yeah.
But I think it also, what you're talking about, finding beauty despite, and when you were just talking, it made me think about, I remember in the early months of COVID, despite obviously a lot of the concerns and the horrors. Remember when some of the stories were like, wow, the dolphins are back in the canals in Venice, and we're seeing, growth of, and I feel, it's such a human story, right? As we, and I say very, cautiously, We are not out of the, the mess yet. But as we have steadily gotten vaccinated and been able to open up the country again, how quickly we forget what we were temporarily putting on hold, which was our carefree devastation and our abuse of the planet. I'm talking about on a micro level. We could get a lot of mileage out of going after the gas companies and the plastic and so forth. But I'll point the finger at myself first, right? Like, we're consumers of junk and we create junk. So yeah, again, I'm unashamed to continue to hammer the word humility, because I think that is important on so many levels, ecological, political, artistic. But I think, and I keep wanting to say, Justen, let's be very clear. These images are beautifully rendered, and that's what's catching people's hearts. But I also think that this deep resonance is not a coincidence, that it's stirring up some of these very complicated and maybe unarticulated emotions that people feel about our relation to the earth circa 2021, when a lot of us are behind a screen 12 hours a day. Right.
Yeah, I guess, I have the fortune, because I've worked with the earth for so long, and I come from, again, my family was, I had a family that was farming, and that I see, I guess I see the seasons and the changes, and I know where my food comes from. I can grow my own food. And I guess when one does not have that connection, it's hard to understand how necessary the earth is. I do another thing about the pandemic, which I thought was interesting too, is how many people started to go outside again and get outside and be in nature and go for walks. That seemed to be really, the sales of like mountain bikes and canoes and kayaks and camping gear and all this stuff started to like go through the roof.
Sure.
But I think that I think part of what really is difficult for us as human beings is I believe we come from the earth, and how can you, when you're so disconnected from what you've come from, no wonder we feel alienation. No wonder there's depression. No wonder there's mental illnesses. I mean, that's not the only contributing factor, but I do think one of the things that has really afflicted humanity is our disconnection. It's almost like we're becoming something else, something technological or machine-like. And I don't know where that journey will go. I don't know if that's a dead end for us evolutionarily. Yeah. Or if we're going to be, brought back forcefully to a relationship with the earth. And of course, prior to patriarchal God in the heavens, the earth itself was the divinity, right? And we had a very intimate. Humanity had a very intimate, and this is universal all over the world. We had an intimate experience with the earth. Everything was divine. It was the trees, the rocks, the streams. This existed everywhere. And then that was like really stolen and hijacked. I mean, I don't want to go on a diatribe about religion. I'm not here to do that. But what I do think is our relationship with the earth is a healthy one for us to be able to cultivate. So if these images at all stir that'd be beyond my intention. I don't really have any intention with them, but that would be
right.
It'd be cool.
Well, so Justen, one of the questions I was going to ask you, and I'll concede that it's probably not the right question. I wanted to ask, because I think it's a little lazy on my part to say, all right, Justen, so what have you learned about writing through this project using images? I think the more appropriate question for you, or at least one I'd love to hear you expound on, is you clearly do have a profound and deep, beautiful relationship with the earth. Both in terms of, what you've described, your heredity and what you do, but you've been a writer, and you have, you are one that likes to reward your senses, right? You like good food and conversation. Talk a little bit about how maybe this is just an extension of your personal aesthetic, in that, looking at it that way, to me, it makes even more sense. Like, again, I was happy to, acknowledge your growth and your expansion as an artist, but maybe this is really just, well, of course this happened because someone that is of the earth and is, cares deeply about the beauty of the world. So at a certain point, maybe words just aren't enough.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. Um, I wonder what I did learn about writing through this. I think, setting that aside for a moment, I think I learned about color a lot because before these images, I was making black and white images exclusively.
Yep.
And the sudden, literally overnight jump to color is very different than black and white. Um, it we have the level of interest is different, or the what the viewer sees when they look at black and white. What you have to do in black and white imagery for the viewer compared to what you have to do with color. But what I was interested in with the color and the textures, is this kind of, the emotions that color can bring. Black and white, I shouldn't say black and white is devoid of color because I actually see a lot of color in black and white. But I think one of the responses that I got from people would just be to the color. Some of them are very blue, they're saturated, um, reds, yellows, oranges, blues, almost like, and primaries. But so one of the things was I learned a ton about was just this, and I'll share another image
Yes,
if I
please.
can,
Yep.
is really just like what color does and how color can be part of. I have an image in the background that I'll try to hide, but this is, oops, that's a different one, but this is a very red,
Mhm.
very red one. A lot of red and white. But just like, what were people reacting to in color? Uh, People would just sometimes just go, "Oh, I love those reds," or "Oh, I love those blues." And I think that was almost a shortcut for some emotion that they weren't able to quite express. And
Mhm.
so, like this image is of feedlots in outside of Lubbock. And so
Mhm.
feedlots are just these massive places where cattle are fed in these pens. And um, the red is, really partly the soil and, the geology. But I also thought that it's kind of a metaphor for what's going on there too, right? The raising of animals for us to eat.
Yeah.
Um, so um, I guess that was one thing I would have to say, and I'm still learning about is color and how to work in color.
Well, Justin, talk about if you care to, what were some of the different colors doing for you? And I'll take a crack at it as well. But were there a couple of colors in particular that surprised you in terms of the coloring and the vividness of how they presented, but also were there specific feelings that you associated with some of the colors?
Sure. So the golds, the yellows and the golds were the first images that I started to make, and um, as I'm investigating this, I think that there is something in the chemistry, the geology of different regions of the earth, because I've now taken these aerial photos from different places, not just Texas,
Yeah.
and the colors are different depending on the soil, depending on the vegetation, probably the topography as well. I'm not really sure. I'm still kind of learning.
Right.
What happened in West Texas was really specific to West Texas, and I found that amazing. The first the first images were really these gold, like almost gold leaf, like this, like gold threaded fabrics. I'm gonna share another quick
Yeah,
image.
please.
Um, uh, just so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. This is one of the
Yes.
early images, right? And it
Hmm.
looks like to me, it looks like a gold tapestry or fabric.
Yeah.
And you have this little, like, almost, if you can see my cursor, like these little squiggles that are is like Sanskrit script or some kind of ancient script that we don't, so that was all happening for me.
Hmm.
And so there was something really kind of sacred that was going on with this, especially with this color, this yellow, and then that green that's threaded through, that
Hmm.
just, was something that reminded me of, like Buddhist temples, or some sacred cloth, but something very, very sacred is all.
Yeah. Yeah.
and I was really drawn to that because then I was almost like the earth itself is saying its sacredness, revealing its sacredness. And, so
Well, I'm just thinking of something else for the first time too, Justin. As you're talking, I'm remembering those first images that were more gold and yellow. I was like, this is it. This is everything. And then you started getting into the oranges, and I said, this is wow. Even then in real time, it was, if you would, I think the project, for those of us fortunate enough to have followed it the way we did, I think the project would have had just as much resonance if you just dropped 10 images of different colors. It would have been, but it almost might have been too much to take in. There was something real, it was a real gift to go from gold to orange to red to those deep blues.
yeah.
And again, just this awe of realizing that's not a river, that's the earth too. It's just in different colors and the different textures. And I was just going to say, because I want you to talk more about the specific colors, but just when you were talking, it also occurred to me, speaking totally for myself, I think we just think like, well, America's new. When you're talking about Buddhist temples, I'm like, yeah, ancient Asia and the Holy Land. The earth is as old as the earth is. So even America, right? Like there's something in some ways, maybe is in some areas of our country anyway, certainly this is uncorrupted earth that's been here just as long as all the other earths. So certainly not a profound observation on my part, but just thinking about, I think I think about America, right, as, well, America's new. Well, it isn't when we look at it from the sky.
Yeah, I mean, some of the oldest land on the planet is in Western United States. So, I mean, and I think about all the writing that has gone on, through rain and wind and snow and erosion, and, plate tectonics, so this whole story, much older than us, has been going on for, billions of years. And I could get, I get to photograph it in one, at one moment. And I have to say too, these images, of course, um, if I could take them over successive days or, months apart or whatever, they would be changed. They would be different. So they only exist for one moment, right? Because if it's, yeah. So you get one moment, which is true for photography. It's just a capture of a single moment.
And I think a geologist could quickly correct me. I'll expose my ignorance, but it occurs to me, if I'm not mistaken, there's arguably more static images of the ocean, which is, whatever, 70% of the planet, but the waves coming in are pretty consistent. Whereas you're right, the earth is constantly getting haircuts and makeovers and losing weight, gaining. But the earth is ever changing. But again, I just speaking for myself, Justin, it's very it's like an epiphany of sorts to think, well, the earth is static and the ocean moves and is poetry, but boy, the earth is ceaselessly reconfiguring itself. I love that. I love your observation that if you did this entire project a week later, all the images would be different. That's amazing.
Yeah. And like, again, going back to that image of the farmer driving the tractor and not really being cognizant of at all of the design, this beauty that is happening. We have a time frame, which is a human time frame. It's not long. At the most, we have 100 years.
Right.
And our stories, we can reach back a little bit further. But the geologic time, the earth time, the story time of the earth is so vast.
Mm-hmm.
We can tap into it though. I mean, I do think, as creators, because we are it, we can get into that vastness, but it does take it takes a different way of looking at things, stepping outside of our own, lifespan and this time that is built on work weeks and human
Right.
time lifespans, and looking at things that are. And again, this goes back to those trees too. I think about the trees. One of the things I saw in the tree stumps I don't have any images of those to share, but when I was saying I felt like I was looking out at the galaxies, I started to consider the life of trees. And the ones that I was photographing right around my house are 100, 200, 250 years old. And them standing there in that space on the earth on one spot in the earth and holding their leaves and branches up to the sun and to the heavens and to the, to the stars, and kind of drinking into them as these giant antennae, like taking into their trunks the like like a what is it when you take a photograph over time, like
Oh,
a,
a time lapse.
yeah, like a time lapse photo
Mhm.
of the heavens that are circling above them, right? And these tree trunks were like images of the heavens over hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Um, so
And
I don't know.
folks, I'd like to point out that neither Justin or I ingested hallucinogenics before the session.
I just
This is how we roll sober.
oh well, hell, even if not, it's so fun to, it's what we do when we're creating things, right? We just get absorbed with what's happening. We surrender to
Yes.
whatever whatever has to be made.
Well, so that leads nicely to the next question, Justin, the inevitable question, which is, I don't know if I know if you've told me. I mean, I know that there has not been like a hard line finish on this project, but does this project continue in Texas? Are there particular landscapes or areas that you already have in mind, or because I'll make a request as a fan, like, boy, would it be interesting. I imagine any other area, like you pointed out, would be radically different because of the way the earth is, but something maybe the opposite of maybe the dry, soil rich landscapes of Texas, something more verdant, might be a whole other mind boggling revelation.
Yeah, I haven't um I haven't explored any areas that are very verdant. Um, Kansas might come closest, which Kansas, interestingly enough, is emerald greens. When you photograph them and start to work with their colors, it's like Oz, interestingly. I don't know how that happens. Maybe it's all the corn, the field, anyway, it's just really rich greens and golds. But I have been working, I'm starting a new kind of project with this about endangered rivers of the world. And so I thought maybe as a way, even though I don't like to be too political or to have an agenda really in my work, but having recently come across an article that talks about some of the issues facing rivers, and this article lists the 20 most endangered rivers in the world.
Mhm.
And this is because of either pollution. I mean, there are lots of factors: pollution and damming and industry, water diversion, using, for example, like the Colorado River to irrigate things. The river is literally being siphoned off before it ever gets to the ocean. So this recent project, I've just started to kind of collect and capture images of all of these different rivers. And, I hope to, I've done one post on it, but I think I will certainly do more. I want to kind of bring attention to the issue of just water in general, because without that, we're done for sure. We need to really care for the water on this planet, and our fresh water, drinkable water, not the salt water. We can't
Right.
drink as of yet. So I think that's kind of where the project is going, but I don't think it'll end there either. I mean, it's just there's so many things to. It's just such an interesting way to explore. I love to travel, and this is a way I can travel um, from my seat. I prefer to travel the other way, but it's just um, a way to be able to go anywhere instantly, and kind of and capture things. But I think more than anything, Sean, I'd have to say, and this is like such a non almost like a non thing to get out of the work, is what you had referred to earlier, is just the beauty of the images. Like, to me, just to make something that I think is beautiful and I want to share that with people,
Yeah.
and if people find it beautiful, that's enough. um, like to aside from any political agenda or any kind of agenda about anything,
Yeah.
that we shouldn't eat meat or we should be taking care of the rivers, blah blah blah. I think just to be able to share with people an experience of beauty, um, you know, connects people.
Well, not only do I endorse and agree with that sentiment, Justin, and appreciate it. But honestly, having had some discussions just during this festival, very specifically around the notion of storytelling for social justice, storytelling in politics, using art to influence, all of those are worthy and necessary discussions. But as usual, I think some of the most profound observations occur with the least amount of noise, and allowing the space for a human being to be in dialogue with themselves. And I think part of what your images are doing, and I also want to acknowledge that there's always a space for beauty for its own sake, and there doesn't need to be politics. In fact, I think we could have a whole other discussion about why so often when art is made with political intentions, it usually fails, because you can't artfully combine those two. It's a different type of storytelling. I think I'm proving today that everyone's bringing their own discourse and dialogue and baggage to these images, but I look at that as a very powerful thing. You're not posting these images looking for consensus. If anything, I think what you're doing is you're obliging people to be a little uncomfortable, to be a little discombobulated, and then put the pieces together of what they're seeing, what they're feeling.
Thank you. If I could put a little blatant plug in for my Instagram feed,
I insist
that's
on.
where, well, I think if people want to kind of get the scope of the story of these images, they can go to, my Instagram, Justen Ahren, and just see where it started at the end of, early February is when I started them. And you can just kind of follow the story. You can follow the various stories there, because there's different threads that have gone on through the couple of months of posting these.
Well, and it's also available in booklet form.
Oh, that's true.
And shame on me, what a terrible moderator. I have a copy in this house that I didn't pull out. Normally I'd be pulling it up. So talk about what that is and how that can be obtained, because I think a lot of people are interested in that.
Yeah, you can go to Vleet Gallery, which is Van, V-A-N, Vleet, V-L-I-E-T, gallery.com. And Carla Van Vleet is the owner of the gallery in Vermont, and she exhibited these works, and she's been kind enough to put together these booklets, kind of made to order, of 20 of these images. She did a beautiful job. She's a wonderful artist in her own right. So you can check out Van Vleet Gallery and get these little booklets of the work. Yeah.
And what about those of us that are, your super fans, your stalkers that are interested in some frameable prints?
Yeah, they're happening. They're happening. I have them. I've begun printing them, and it's an interesting process. I'm not a tech person, as I mentioned, so printing is a whole nother level. It's just a whole different thing to learn and to figure out. It doesn't necessarily, but anyway, they're there and they're available, and you can go to my website, justenahren.com. You can see, things there that are available to print. Anything on my Instagram feed or my Facebook feed, they're all printable too. I've printed everything on there just to, be sure that they're all kind of print to order. But Sean, I wanted to circle back too about just to talk about storytelling in regards to imagery. And I just think to reiterate, I think we're at such an interesting place technologically with social media and the ability to post. We live in such a visual world that I think the new art forms that can come out of this are extraordinary. And if anything, I'm so disappointed in Instagram and Facebook because of the things that people choose to post, as opposed to posting things that could actually inspire us and motivate us and just give us beauty. And so we get like dinner plates all the time, or pictures of animals, which are cute. They're lovely, but there's a lot of room for, without getting on any soapbox and preaching to anybody, we can just share with one another things that are inspiring and beautiful, that really create this kind of civic space, this community. I mean, I know there's community there, but so much is just, it seems like it can be just such base. You kind of have to look. And I think as a responsibility, like one of the things that I feel responsible to do is not put my drivel there. Um, and I'm judging my own stuff. I'm not talking about what anybody else puts on there, but my own personal clutter into that space. I
Yeah.
want to I want to add to I want to add to a space. I want to make it a beautiful space to people, for people to come to, and not just
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not just clutter it up.
Well, closing thoughts from me, I will not ever pass up an opportunity to bring it all back to 1455, which is, one of the things that we talk about is I ceaselessly talk about celebrating creativity and building community. And I think what you're talking about and what you're doing is a real forum and an opportunity and impetus for us to share. So what 1455 is trying to do through this festival and through our programming is provide space and a showcase for worthy expression that can bring communities that are interested in this. And my optimistic take would be that it starts smaller with a group that's passionate about the work you're doing, and then it spreads outward from there.
Mhm. Well, Sean, you're doing an amazing job, and you've built in a short time with 1455. You've built an amazing organization, and as you can see, I mean, the hundreds of people, if not thousands, that are attending this, and all the great work you're doing. So thanks to you.
Well, I appreciate that. And I will just reiterate that without the great work, there's nothing to celebrate. And without the people showing up to share it, there's no event. So I thank you. And Chuck, I think we just came in right under the wire. So to be continued as always, Justin, but the earth tends to beauty despite. Thank you. A huge bright spot and inspiration for me personally, and I think for a lot of other people in 2021. So we will be very interested in seeing all the different things you do in the foreseeable future.
No, thank you so much, Sean. I'll see you next week. I look forward to it.
We will cherish the senses and the earth in person.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having
All
me.
right, you
All
bet.
right. All right.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in the next session.